So if you watched any of the promotional material about and leading up to the production of Marvel's new Fantastic Four First Steps movie, you'll know that they made the Silver Surfer a woman. Now, the naive assumption going in was that this was a simple sex swapping of the characters, something that we've been seeing for a long time now in a lot of woke media. You just take a formerly male lead and you swap his sex, maybe his skin color, make him gay, etc. Well, surprise, surprise, this isn't as straightforward as a sex change operation. This Silver Surfer isn't Norrin Radd. Instead, it's his canonical girlfriend, Shalla-Bal. Because, of course it is. One of my friends, Legacy, who's a Marvel enthusiast, recently made me aware of what's going on here. And anyway, why is any of this significant? Well, let me create a picture for you. All the promotional material for this movie, including the social media hubbub, built itself on the assumption that Marvel, Disney were sex swapping a character, and everybody fell for that. Now, of course, it's nothing new for them. They've been doing this ever since The Force Awakens with Rey, if not farther back than that. And we often get this repeated insistence in cases like this that a sex change makes absolutely no difference. It doesn't do anything fundamental about the character, right? A race swap, it doesn't do anything to change the character, right? And if they make the character gay or bi or trans, hey, nothing fundamental changes, so stop complaining. When we know the reality is this is all an attempt to normalize and simultaneously glorify non-white, non-Christian normalcy. So here's the bait and switch. A lot of these narratives exist outside the actual movie and were propagated for the movie's marketing. But what's really going on, as I said, is instead of Norrin Radd, his canonical girlfriend Shalla-Bal is the Silver Surfer. It's anything but a straightforward sex change operation. And let me break this down even further, because there's a lot of people who might not be familiar with the Fantastic Four or how this all works. Here's how the story goes. Norrin Radd is the original Silver Surfer. He was created by Jack Kirby and Stan Lee back in the 60s. The Silver Surfer is a cosmic superhero. He has godlike powers, but he's also a tragic figure. He was formerly a philosopher and a pacifist, and he hailed from a faraway planet called Zen-La. Now, somewhere along the way, he was forced to make a deal, a Faustian bargain, with a planet-eating titan named Galactus. And he did this because he wanted to save his home and the woman he loved, that woman being Shalla-Bal. And in exchange, he became Galactus's herald, so he spends all his time scouting planets for future destruction. And that's the core of his character. He made a deal with the devil in order to save his home and his girlfriend. Pretty simple and straightforward, right? Now, this dynamic between Norrin Radd and Shalla-Bal echoes a long-standing tradition in Western storytelling, where the hero's journey, a male journey, is framed around sacrifice, struggle, and eventual redemption. Meanwhile, the female figure in this story often represents the home, a place of peace, and the ideal that the hero is fighting to restore or to protect. It's an archetype that traces back to classical mythology and medieval romance, where your hero departs from their domicile and their familiar to face chaos or evil. Meanwhile, the woman who is often his wife, or maybe the woman who will be his wife, embodies the safe world, the world that he left behind. And this is all significant because it has long worked in storytelling. It establishes the woman as the living symbol of what's at stake and gives the hero a moral and emotional compass. That drives the story. The hero's quest is motivated by his desire to return to or protect his woman. Therefore, this whole swapping the woman into the male protagonist role due to want of representation just goes to show time and time again that the writers of these stories do not understand, nor do they care about what these characters actually mean. You see, not only is the Silver Surfer's story a moral epic, what makes it compelling here is because it is not an ideal. What he is doing is not noble, it's evil. But we also know that he's not doing this because he wants to. He's doing this because he knows that if he doesn't, he stands to lose everything he cares about. Now, Shalla-Bal, becoming the new Surfer, flips that sacrifice into entitlement. It goes from a story about how I'm gonna give everything up to save you, my love, to I deserve this power. because I'm just as important as my male counterpart. Now, I wanted to talk about this in a way that nobody else currently is, because most people will just write this off as, oh, it's more woke storytelling. You know, wokeness, which we are often being told is gone. We got rid of it in 2024, guys. The progressive left just retreated. Now we can all rest easy, right? Well, we know this is a very deliberate rewriting of who is allowed to be the center of myth. And this is the difference between equality and equity. You see, it isn't enough that Marvel, Disney just swap the sex of an established character. No, they need to go further than that. It needs to mean something. So they reorient the story in such a way that very deliberately goes beyond the swapping. And so that manifests in this idea that men are not allowed to hold the central role anymore. It is not supposed to be unique to them. And so that means the woman who these men have been swapped out for are driven not by the same sacrificial morals that drove the men to do what they do. Instead, women are driven by a shallow moral posturing where they have to be the ones in control. And the reason that we recognize this narrative as shallow is because it has assumed a zero-sum model of intersexual relations. In other words, if a man occupies a position of power or symbolic meaning, well then it is always illustrated as inherently at the expense of a woman. And this all undergirds the assumption that the male protagonist must be replaced rather than supported in these stories. The male protagonist needs to be reinterpreted or developed alongside a female counterpart. That way you have a contrast. And in this way, the woman becomes a corrective instrument, a righteous disruptor of an unjust history. And that's why a sex swap or even a race swap is never implemented at face value. We know this. We know the story is going to go in a direction that fundamentally has to acknowledge why the swap occurred and why the movie at that point is yet another effigy burned at the expense of a world and characters whose roots are culturally Christian. And that attack on Christianity is essentially what we recognize as woke. So now we're supposed to believe it wasn't Norrin. It wasn't the character who sacrificed everything to save his world and became Galactus's herald. But instead it's his girlfriend stepping up to scold Galactus about her parents' values. Yes, a woman driven by emotional vanity and some vague moral superiority who got handed the power role. No, it wasn't Norrin making a Faustian bargain with the devil to save his home world and getting cursed with eternal guilt as a result. It was Shalla-Bal doing it because her parents wouldn't approve of, what, planet eating? What the hell are we even talking about here? Now, Legacy, my friend here, has had his eye on these developments for a while now, and what he informs me is that this has been going on since the last Spider-Gwen, but maybe earlier than that. In fact, let's even look at this tragic figure personality from an angle of the opposite sex. Harley Quinn was once a tragic figure, a wild portrayal of how manipulation and abuse warp a woman's mind, and her instability wasn't generic, it was deeply feminine, tied directly to her relationship with the Joker. And one might argue that kind of character arc couldn't just be swapped out for a male version. But instead of reckoning with that damage through meaningful change, the story now hands her off to Poison Ivy, an eco-terrorist who empowers her with platitudes and performative independence. So no real healing occurs, just further pivoting to that continual reassumption of a zero-sum model of intersexual relations. That's it. Female characters are resigned to a forever war against men occupying positions of power. Power which is always, for whatever reason, derived inherently at the expense of women. Now, if Marvel Disney was pragmatic about the inevitable direction all this ideology would take storytelling, they might as well completely erase characters like Mar-Vell, the first Captain Marvel. You know, just tell everyone he never existed after they replace him with Medic Una, because that'll teach all you white folks a lesson. You see that less prominent female character in the background there? Yeah, you misogynist, I'm talking at you. That woman is Medic Una. And it's not fair that she's just an unimportant background character. No, that diminishes her value, you bigot. So not only are we going to make her the main character, but we're going to swap roles and turn her into a tool of righteous indignation against all men who would dare occupy positions of power that every woman obviously deserves. And you know, that might sound like a stretch, right? But it would follow the pattern. Instead of honoring the original heroes, newer stories are just going to swap them out for lesser known characters, usually women, and pretend that they were the real heroes all along. Ultimately, these kinds of changes aren't about storytelling anymore, but I probably didn't need to tell you about that. Everyone pretty much already knows this is true. The stories are written by people who didn't actually like the originals and are now continuously fixing them to match their own shallow beliefs. Actually, that's cope. This isn't really individual subjective beliefs. This is all basically state-mandated orthodoxy, governed by Marxist philosophies that have been passed down through institutions like colleges and other forms of public education, all to instill equity within our systems. And so they use modes of entertainment, which ostensibly teach us how to act more like civil human beings, by ensuring that every major male character is replaced with a strong, independent woman, even if it doesn't make sense for the story or if it doesn't make sense in general. And it's not happening, and it's good that it is happening, and stop noticing it, you fucking bigot. You know, in another video I mentioned the numinous, that mysterious transcendent quality that once infused stories of magic and fantasy of old. But from Kim Belair talking about forced representation in God of War Ragnarok to these repeated race and sex swaps enacted by Mar-Vell, Disney, or by DC Comics, etc. It's all a futile attempt to recover the loss of a numinous quality, something that once marked all of these stories and has never been recaptured in the last, 25 years or so? And you know, I mock you, Mar-Vell. I mock you, Disney. I mock all you corporate storytellers, because for all the millions and billions of dollars you pour into these franchises, you will never, ever recover that quality. All you can do is create more and more sanitized, formulaic narratives trapped within the confines of executive decisions and market capture. And if there does exist any modicum of creative genius among these corporations, it will quickly be stifled by the drumbeat of commodified spectacle and ideological branding. Your magical comic book worlds are now bureaucratic playgrounds grounded in your forever culture wars with former fans. And these worlds will never be places of spiritual challenge and discovery ever again. Now, of course, the social media train will never stop. The performative grievance rituals of old fans continues, and online personalities are bound to be participants to these endless conflicts themselves. But ask yourselves, as a fan of whatever franchise you're still holding on to, is your franchise even cultivating the same love for that which drew you into it in the first place? And if not, what's holding you to it? Are you really going to regale future fans with stories of strong women in a perpetual struggle for dominance over men, where every story boils down to scoring points in a cultural tug-of-war, where women are cast as forever rising, forever proving themselves against men who supposedly are always holding them down, and yet for some reason these women are never allowed to reach a place where they overcome their adversaries? So what exactly does that tell us about heroism? Well, what exactly does that tell us about sacrifice? If anything, this just affirms that women, even when they've been made as powerful as men, as intelligent as men, and as capable as men, seemingly can't ever achieve what they want in life unless it is in the constant pursuit of, but ultimate inability to attain, what makes a man a man.